much I love you. Do you? You don't know how much I love you. Do you? Just try to remember the best of us. Just try to remember the best of us.
Welcome everyone. Welcome, welcome. So lovely to see so many faces and people. I'm still admitting people from the waiting room here, so we may just have a moment or two of more people joining us. I'm Deborah Benham. I'm one of the co-lead links for Transition Network International and the host for today's webinar. And while we wait for people to continue joining us, would you be so kind as to maybe just post a little introduction to yourselves in the chat here, say maybe where you're calling in from, and if you're what kind of transition group or hub you're connected with or region. We'd love to see some introductions. We've still got a few people joining. Wow, 44 people so far. How exciting. This is wonderful. In a moment, I will introduce Don and we will get started. But I'm just going to wait for the last couple of people who are entering in through the waiting room here to fully join us. Those introductions appearing in the chat. Thanks, people. And we've got folks coming in from the UK and Australia and British Columbia. Wow, this is so exciting. All right, lovely. Oh, still more people coming in through the waiting room. Anai, could I ask you to continue bringing people in from the waiting room while I introduce Don? Thank you so much. Okay, so let's get started. I'm going to be having a 2-hour webinar today, which will include a presentation from the wonderful Don Hall, and then some time for questions and answers and discussion, and then some breakout rooms to talk about some of the themes that have been arising, and then kind of a closing session altogether. You can stay for as long as you can, and it'd be lovely if when we have our discussion and breakouts, if you want to open your cameras, but during the presentation, no, if you don't want to. And in terms of Zoom etiquette, probably most of you are pretty familiar with Zoom now, but just in case you're not, it's really helpful if we can all stay on mute if we're not actually talking, which keeps the background noise nice and low, which is great for just our focus for each other and who's speaking, and also for the recording. And I think that's everything. When we get to the question and answer section, we'll raise your hand using the raise hand icon at the bottom of your screen, because that helps us know who raised their hand first, because it will keep a little yellow hand up, which will help us with the moderation. But for now, I would love to introduce Don Hall, who is the author of this wonderful book, the Regeneration Handbook, Transform Yourself to Transform the World, which is probably the first big transition book that's been published for quite a while. And we're very excited about it, and many receiving our copies and getting a chance to look at it. Don's been involved in the transition movement for many years at the local, regional, national and international levels, and I'm currently fortunate enough to have him as a colleague at Transition Network International in the training coordinator role. So without further ado, I will hand over to you, Don.
Well, thanks so much, Deborah. Yeah, thank you all for coming. Special thanks to the Practicing Transition team and to everyone at Transition Network for making this happen. Yeah, just really grateful and excited to be sharing with you a little bit about the Regeneration Handbook, which came out from New Society Publishers in June and was recently released last month in the UK and Europe. And I wrote this book for anyone interested in building more resilient and regenerative communities. But for obvious reasons, throughout the book, I use the transition movement as kind of an extended case study and really dig into every aspect of it. So you could ask, who are you to write a book about transition? I first encountered this movement when I was doing graduate studies in environmental leadership at Naropa University here in Boulder, Colorado, where I live. I stumbled across a group that was called Boulder County Going Local at the time, became the first officially recognized transition initiative in North America, Transition Boulder County, and then Transition Colorado. Worked with Michael Brownlee and Lynette Marie Hanthorne for a couple of years there. But really started to feel like if I was going to be of help to other transitioners and teach other people how to do this, I needed to have direct experience on the ground starting a transition initiative from scratch. So I moved back to my sometimes hometown of Sarasota, Florida in 2010. Started Transition Sarasota, served as executive director for 6.5 years. Also during this time, I became a transition trainer and continue to serve in that role. Became co-director of Transition US in 2017 and executive director in 2020 after my colleague Caroline Staten took a well-deserved retirement. She was the executive director for 12 years from the very beginning, and then went on sabbatical to write this book and ended up working as training coordinator for the International Transition Network. So I've been involved with this for about 16 years, pretty continuously, pretty full-time, full on. But I do have a cheerful disclaimer, which comes from the introduction to the Regeneration Handbook, but could also be thought of as a little bit of a manifesto for this talk here today. Let's see. Although my background as a founder of a local transition initiative, coordinator for a statewide hub, executive director for a national hub, international transition trainer makes me somewhat uniquely qualified to write about this movement, I want to be clear from the outset that my views do not necessarily reflect those of all transitioners. Part of the beauty and brilliance of the transition movement has always been its insistence that there's no one right way to do transition. And rather than seeking to make a definitive statement about what transition is or isn't, my hope is that the Regeneration Handbook sparks discussion and inspires others to share their thoughts, especially those who haven't been part of this conversation before. Because I'm inherently limited by my perspective as a university-educated, middle-aged, straight white male who has lived most of his life in urban and suburban areas throughout the US, I would very much like to hear more from BIPOC transition leaders, those who live in other countries and rural areas, women, LGBTQ plus folks, and youth. I believe we're still in the early stages of figuring out how the transition process actually works, and nobody has all the answers. Only by sharing our experiences and insights with each other will we develop the collective wisdom needed to fundamentally transform our world. So, mainly just hoping to spark a conversation here today and very curious to see where it leads. And, the Regeneration Handbook covers a lot of ground, but given our context here today with Transition Network, a lot of you have been involved in transition for many years. I felt that the most relevant points to cover are my thoughts about kind of the past, present, and future of the transition movement. If you're interested in learning more about the Regeneration Handbook, all the other topics that it covers, you could visit my new website, evolutionarychange.org. There's lots of excerpts there, recordings of other talks, podcasts, and so forth. So yeah, starting out, what is the state of the transition movement? What is this journey we've been on? Even after a couple of years of working at the international level, I still feel like I can mostly only speak for the US. That's what I know the best. But I do suspect from my conversations with colleagues around the world that transition has taken a similar trajectory in a lot of different countries, and that we've seen this kind of trajectory for the movement as a whole. So based on my own experience and research, I think that the history of transition in the US can be divided into kind of two phases. One, when we were kind of the new kid on the block, the sexy new thing, from 2008 to 2013, and then a second period from 2014 to 2022, where that wasn't the case anymore. I think one data point that shows this really clearly is that in the first 5 years of the movement in the US, Transition US officially recognized 129 transition initiatives. So that's 26 per year, but during the next 8 years, only recognized 46, 6 per year, which represents a 77% decline in the number of new transition initiatives coming about each year. Similarly, 2008 to 2013, 120 transition trainings, 24 per year, versus 24 in the next 8 years, only 3 per year, which is an even larger 88% decline per year. And I think it's worth mentioning that during the early years of the transition movement in the US, we were frequently, occasionally covered by the mainstream media. New York Times Magazine did a multi-page spread in 2009 on the first Great Unleashing in the US. And since, we've been mainly covered by media outlets that are especially sympathetic to transition. So resilience.org, Permaculture Design Magazine, Yes Magazine, which we love those publications. They're fantastic, but they don't have nearly the same kind of reach or, kind of conferred the same kind of prestige as those mainstream publications. So you can see the trend here. And just one last data point from my research, as of 2022, only 31% or 55 of the 175 official transition initiatives that Transition US had recognized remained active. Okay, so this seems like some really bad news. In some respects it is, but I think it's worth remembering that only 1/3 of small businesses make it through their first decade. I imagine that's even higher or even lower rate for social change groups. And very few movements in the US have even 55 different local initiatives. So I think that can be considered somewhat of a moderate success to build on. And there's many ways that we can continue to improve. And one more thing about this kind of trajectory is that I believe it's a very natural progression for movements. This is a graph from Bill Moyer, not to be confused with Bill Moyers from PBS fame, activist Bill Moyer's 1987 Movement Action Plan, where reflecting on US civil rights, anti-interventionist, and anti-oppression movements, he found that movements typically pass through 8 stages en route to really transformative impact and widespread acceptance. And what he said was the most important thing to notice is that takeoff, when a movement is growing the fastest and has most attention, is only stage 4. And he wrote that within a few years after achieving the goals of takeoff, every major social movement of the past 20 years has undergone a significant collapse in which activists believed that their movements had failed, that power institutions were too powerful, and that their own efforts were futile. This has happened even when movements were actually progressing reasonably well along the normal path taken by past successful movements. So I think that's a bit of a warning to us to say, even though maybe transition hasn't had the juice that it had when it first started out, that we shouldn't think that we failed. This is normal. Even the most successful movements tend to only have a short time in the spotlight, and we need to continue building power and building on the success that we've had in order to really achieve our ultimate aims. So I'll stop there and just see if Deb, if you wanted to chime in with any questions or comments before I move into the next section.
Thanks, Don. Well, I'm really glad that you're bringing in this Bill Moyer's framework, which is something I read a few years ago and found really helpful, particularly to help us understand how groups, movements change and adapt and change shape. And one of the things that we've seen in the evaluation work that we've done with transition over the years is that many kind of morph into something else. So they change the name because the word transition doesn't resonate locally, but they're still continuing to do interesting similar things. Like my local transition group is called Sustainable Bridport rather than Transition Bridport. And we also see groups spawning kind of or budding off lots of other little projects that become their own incorporated entities, whether that's food projects or garden projects or repair cafes or things like that. Transition, although I think some of this atrophy that we see in transition is also that things evolve and morph into other groups, and transition's been a great seed for those. And sometimes we've had the opportunity to track that a bit, like with Transition Tooting in London. And I think they tracked that they had sort of 12 or 15 different groups and projects that had kind of been seeded by the transition group. Now that transition group is still very active, but others have, decreased as new projects have kind of got legs and become official entities and started doing their own thing. And that's fine. That's exciting and just as we would want it to be. So I think the success of the movement, it's not so easy to measure by the number of groups anyway. In fact, it's never going to be possible really to measure the success of the movement. But as you say, we're still here and there's still groups starting up and groups doing amazing things and groups gathering into regional and national hubs across countries to work together. So that shows me there's still lots of energy in there, as well as lots of opportunity to evolve and change and do differently and do better. But yeah, it's really exciting that you're here, Don, and starting to take us on this journey. So I'll hand back over to you.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to put this out there. I know it's kind of a little bit hard beginning, but I think that we, most of us who have been involved with this for a while know that there has been a shift since the early days, and I really want people not to despair, to double down on our investment in this movement, and I think we can do it.
Don, one other thing that I forgot to mention is we're still getting inquiries about not just new local groups in existing countries and continents, but new continents, right? We've had, I think it's you actually that's been in contact with a couple of different folks from, is it Tanzania and Nigeria that are interested in starting groups there and having transition trainings there. So yeah, it's interesting to see that the movement is still gathering momentum in some countries and places where it hasn't actually been previously.
Yeah, absolutely. And I thought it was interesting in a recent review of the Regeneration Handbook. One of the most persistent critics, lovingly critical of the transition movement has been Ted Trainer. And he starts out his review saying that if we get through the coming time of great troubles to a sustainable and just society, it will be via a transition towns movement of some kind. And I really believe that we hold a kind of important piece of the overall puzzle, not the whole thing, not even close, but a very important piece. And, we estimate that we have about 1,000 different transition initiatives around the world in 50 countries. So this really has been very successful. And let's build on that.
One other thing, Don, is that I've been listening to a lot of podcasts and research and so on about place-based change and bioregionalism and the importance of change happening at that community or regional level recently. And it still seems that people that are researching how we can do regenerative change and how we can create these preferred futures are saying that the appropriate level, the most effective level to do that is in local communities and to the kind of bioregional level. Rob Hopkins interviewed Daniel Val and Erica, I can't remember what her second name was, but I'll find the link for you on his podcast recently, looking at bioregionalism. And I thought that was a really interesting kind of evidence for the movement still being very necessary, and that localization scale and community-led scale being incredibly important.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of movements that have been influenced by transition over the past couple of decades. And I think for good reason, because I think the way that it was designed is absolutely brilliant. So holistic, multifaceted, so positive. A lot of us are familiar with the 12 steps of transition from Rob Hopkins' 2008 Transition Handbook. But even Rob said that that was the only very early sketch of how transition works, and that he's since let the book go out of print. More recently, how we've been talking about how transition works is this transition animal and the 7 essential ingredients of transition. And there's a few different versions of the 7 essential ingredients floating around, but the ones I'm going to use here, the ones I use in my book, and which attempted to be a synthesis of these different, slightly different versions. First, we have context, and I think transition has a unusually sophisticated understanding of our global context, of the limits to growth, peak everything, this moment that we're currently living in, that we're in the midst of a global economic, social, and environmental polycrisis, and that there's very complex interactions between all of these different challenges that we're facing. But it also, part of the genius of transition is that it leaves a lot of room to be adapted to each local context. That transition looks different everywhere it goes, and is meant to address the greatest needs in each local community. And I think the transition vision is also quite remarkable in being very holistic, in being inspirational, but also realistic. This idea of more self-reliant, resilient, regenerative, equitable, cooperative local communities. It's a vision that's very doable, but also could lead to a much better quality of life, and kind of shows how all the pieces fit together. but also, again, adaptable at the local level to what are the greatest strengths and opportunities of that local community. And the inner transition. Very few social change movements take this as seriously as transition does. That we recognize that to be the leaders that we need to be in this time, that we do need to work on ourselves. We do need to understand the psychology of change and transform culture collectively. Transition also pays a great amount of attention to how do we cultivate healthy groups, which is so important. I think the leading cause of death for activist organizations tends to be internal conflict. And transition has developed a huge amount of tools for working together in collaborative ways. And I think we're getting better at it all the time. Of course, every movement needs to engage its wider community, but I think transition has a rare potential to reach beyond the choir, beyond some traditional divisions, because of how it is a nonpartisan movement, how it's focused at the local level, and how it's all about solutions and what we want our local communities to look like. This hasn't always happened, but I think it has really the ability to bring people together from all walks of life that a lot of social change movements don't. They kind of get stuck in their little political niche. Probably the area where transition excels most is in generating practical projects. And there's many incredible examples from the past 20 years that I'm going to share a few of those later. And I also think it's incredibly important that we're part of a movement, that we speak the same language, that we can share with each other and learn from each other, that we're not constantly reinventing the wheel, and we're networked together to build power at regional, national, and international levels. So I think this transition animal is brilliant in terms of kind of describing all the different pieces that need to be working together all the time to make transition happen. But I also think it doesn't really tell us how these things evolve over time, how we can scale up from a kind of all volunteer group with a lot of passion but very little resources, to how we can make a really significant impact in changing the future of our local communities. So for that, I think we have to look to a different model, which is the 5 stages of transition from Rob Hopkins Transition Companion that was published in 2011. And if you're saying, I have no idea what the 5 stages are, you're certainly not alone in that. I think the Transition Companion was largely overlooked when it came out. It was very complex. There were 64 different tools and ingredients. But there were also these 5 stages in which they were sorted into. And as I kind of returned to that book over and over as I was doing transition work on the ground in Sarasota, Florida, I really started to see how these fit my own experience of how transition naturally unfolded at the local level. So I'll go into that now. So the first stage, appropriately enough, is called starting out. We're basically taking all our best ideas and throwing them at the wall and seeing what sticks. We're bringing together, initiating group, and then engaging in awareness-raising activities that bring together the early adopters and the innovators and start to establish a base of support for that initiative. And also very much reading the field asking people what is most needed? What are you most excited to work on? Where do you think the greatest opportunities lie? So in the first year of Transition Sarasota, we engaged in dozens of awareness-raising activities. This is an event that we put on called the Economics of Happiness Summit, where we screened the documentary film from Local Futures, The Economics of Happiness, that had recently come out, and then held a World Cafe afterwards to discuss, what would an economics of happiness look like here in Sarasota? What of these ideas that we saw in this documentary might be useful here? And so we just screened a lot of documentary films, had a lot of community discussions, gave talks, tabled at community events, hosted reskilling workshops, and all this brought a lot of people in that had already cared about this kind of thing and were just waiting for somewhere to come together. So we had very quickly thousands of people on our mailing list, and it seemed like things were really taking off. But as great as that is, and as important as it is to keep raising awareness throughout this entire process, if all we do is talk, people will start to get bored and they'll start to leave. So we need to move into the next stage of deepening, which is partly about really looking at what's working and what's not. At this stage, we probably still have very limited capacity. And really starting to do practical projects, proving that our ideas can actually work out in the world. And so based on a lot of interest in local food in Sarasota, we launched our first project, which continues to this day, called the Suncoast Gleaning Project. We bring volunteers out to local farms to harvest any surplus produce that they have, whatever maybe can't make it to market next week, and donate that to local food banks to benefit the food insecure in our community. So to date, the Suncoast Gleaning Project has donated over 500,000 pounds of local produce. We've also gotten into gleaning residential fruit trees and rescuing produce from local farmers markets. This has had a big influence on our local food bank, who now does a lot more with fresh produce, has invested greatly in that. And we were also able to serve as a model for a statewide gleaning project pilot program that was run by the Florida Department of Agriculture. So even these kind of first projects can have tremendous ripple effects. And all of this really helped to kind of establish a track record for Transition Sarasota, that we could do good quality work that really made a difference in people's lives. And so that opened up a door to connecting more broadly. Of course, we're connecting from the beginning of this process, but early on, it's usually kind of like-minded individuals and organizations. Whereas once we've kind of proven ourselves, showed that we can really help meet basic needs and benefit the community as a whole, we then have an opportunity to reach farther beyond the choir, to engage more established nonprofits, major cultural institutions, funders, media outlets, local government, local business, and so forth. This is a picture of some of the organizers of our first annual Eat Local Week, receiving a proclamation from one of our county commissioners. And after we had some success with the Suncoast Gleaning Project, a lot of organizations started to look to Transition Sarasota to be kind of a focal point, an organizer for the local food movement as a whole. So we launched this annual Eat Local Week that typically brings together a couple dozen partners every year to put on a couple dozen events celebrating the best of local food and farming in Sarasota and Manatee counties. And we also created Greater Sarasota's Eat Local resource guide and directory to kind of map our whole local food system and make it easier for people to find local food sources. And I think these two projects really made a difference. Before Transition Sarasota, there were a lot of new farms and farmers markets and community gardens starting up, but they were all kind of mostly acting in isolation from each other. And I think what these projects were able to do was to show people that there was this movement happening, that it had this energy and momentum, and there were lots of ways to get involved. Got different partners working together with each other and amplified our collective voice, resulting in a lot of media coverage. And although we certainly can't claim all the credit, partly as a result, the number of listings in our Eat Local guide increased by 270% just from 2011 to 2016, almost a tripling of the number of local farms and farmers markets and so forth in this kind of atmosphere that had been created where there was a lot of opportunity, energy, and excitement around this. So I think if we can do connecting well and we can build these relationships throughout our local community, far beyond the group of people that already think like us, that can bring in a lot more resources, support, expertise, connections to do even bigger projects and to start thinking about, how do we change whole systems? How do we really shift our community's vision for the future? And that's the building stage. And I left Transition Sarasota in 2016. I think at that time we were right on the cusp of building, but had to do more work in connecting first, particularly in finding enough funding to be able to pull off some of these larger projects. But there's many great examples of this in the transition movement from all over the world. I have to apologize in advance that most of my examples are from the US and Europe. I don't think that's because there aren't great examples of this from other places, but just because that's what I happen to know the best and what's been publicized the most up to this point. So this one is from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and the good old US of A. This Victory Garden Initiative began as a project of Transition Milwaukee, soon spun off to form its own organization. And using the model of the permablitz from permaculture, they have now installed over 5,000 edible gardens throughout the city of Milwaukee, with a focus particularly on low-income residents and neighborhoods. And have also started a 20-acre Victory Garden Urban Farm where they give away all their produce for free and host hundreds of kids and adults every year for educational programs. So I think this is kind of the type of scale that we could look to. Another local food related project that I love is the Liège Food Belt, which was initiated by Liège in Transition in Belgium. And since they founded, they now have, I think, 15 local food cooperatives, including several farms, produce markets, bicycle delivery service, an organization for sharing farm machinery and sharing land. They support all of these organizations by doing education, facilitating resource sharing, peer-to-peer learning and connection, and raising millions of euros for new startups and expansions. And they've gotten their local and regional governments on board. They formed a district-wide food policy council. The city is now leasing out public lands to local growers, and many, many more aspects of this project, a whole kind of vision of regional food localization. And I'm trying to get to the right place in my notes so I make sure that I get all my facts correct here. Lots of transition initiatives from Japan to England started their own community-owned renewable energy companies. So instead of, say, a private monopoly utility putting up large solar arrays on farmland, they're doing things like this. Transition Brixton and Brixton Energy putting up solar arrays on public housing to lower energy costs for their communities' most economically disadvantaged residents. And some of these have gotten quite big. I think the biggest one I'm aware of is Bath and West Community Energy, which has raised 22.5 million pounds since their inception, done 34 different community-owned energy projects, and that adds up to 13.35 megawatts, 4,000, enough to power 4,500 homes. As many of you know, a lot of transition initiatives also create their own local complementary currencies that help keep wealth circulating locally rather than being siphoned off back to corporate headquarters, creating more economic inequality, instead supporting local businesses and local people. These currencies can be strong symbols of community pride, like this 10-pound note from Brixton as well, that features hometown hero David Bowie as Aladdin Sane. But yeah, some of these can be quite sophisticated. The Bristol pound at its peak was the UK's largest local currency, over £1 million in circulation. I think something like 500 businesses accepting it. You could use printed notes or pay by text. You could get it from ATMs all over town, use it to ride the bus, pay your energy bills, even pay your local taxes. So very impressive. This was retired in 2021, but the team behind it is already working on the next iteration. This is an example from Totnes.
Oh, Don, your screen
Yeah.
share has just stopped.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Well, I
Oh.
can't see it anymore. While you get that back up and running, just to let people know if you have.
I can see the screen share with many people.
Oh,
Okay. You
That's
were
very
going to say
strange.
something.
Me
Debbie.
too.
okay, other people can see it and I can't. That's weird. Okay, I'll see what's going on. Maybe it's something to do with my screen. I've been posting various links to the things you've been mentioning in the chat. So if anyone does want to follow up more with the Liège group or the Sarasota Eat Local guide, we're posting that in the chat too.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, so just two more examples. This one is from Totnes, where the transition movement started. And they've been doing bigger and bigger projects over the past 18 years. Transition Town Totnes helped to found the Totnes Community Development Society, TCDS. They did back in 2014, they signed an agreement to develop this 8.6 acre derelict industrial site in the center of town, and started doing public consultations. They did 20 of them, received thousands of different contributions, and combined it into a plan that included affordable housing, retirement homes, co-working spaces, the largest arts and culture venue in that area of the country, a health and wellness center, local foods cafe, all powered by 100% renewable energy and owned by the community itself. Sadly, even though 86% of local residents voted for this plan, the owners sold it out behind their back in the last minute to another developer. And so it's still sitting there, still a big eyesore in the center of Totnes, but people are still working to make this happen. And I think, whether or not it ultimately comes to fruition, this idea of community-led redevelopment, I think, is a very powerful one. In most of our communities, it's the developers that are determining our future for us. And I think this is a critical strategy for taking some of that power back. And the last example here, Ungersheim in transition. They call themselves the world's first transition village. This is a small town in France of about 2,000 people. Their mayor watched the documentary In Transition 1.0 and got really inspired by the idea, rallied his government around it. They put together a 21-point plan and started putting it into action. They banned pesticides and herbicides, became a fair trade town, campaigned to shut down a local nuclear power plant. They transformed an old mining site into a nature preserve and park. They built the largest solar farm in their region, which provides power for 10,000 homes, 5 times the village's entire population, and have used public lands and facilities for community kitchens, an eco village, 20-acre regenerative farm, and many, many more things besides. Local currency, atlas of biodiversity, really impressive. And I think this shows clearly the power of when local governments can get behind this idea, what's really possible. All right. So hopefully you're feeling a little bit inspired by all of these possibilities, and coming to the last stage of Daring to Dream, which was the kind of the least well-defined of the 5 stages in the Transition Companion. But if I can find the quote here quick. This is what Rob wrote about it. He said, "The old saying, think global, act local, is still relevant. The ingredients and tools included in this section so far in this book, in this presentation, if implemented, will create a groundswell for change, a catalyst for communities around the world to see an energy-constrained future as a motivator for creative change rather than as a disaster. But without transition thinking being embraced by national government and business and becoming central to the national infrastructure, it will remain marginal." So I think this 5th stage of Daring to Dream is really about how do we step up to kind of national and international stages. And I think the only way that we're really going to do that is to help support enough transition initiatives, I don't know, hundreds, maybe thousands, to step up to thrive at this building stage. And if we can do that and connect the dots between them, I think we can really capture people's attention and get people thinking about this as a viable alternative to the status quo, a different path that humanity could take rather than the one it's taking now. And I really believe that we can do this. I think saw a little bit of evidence when I was executive director of Transition US of kind of a second wave or renaissance of transition. We had in 2021 the largest online training that we ever held, over 150 participants from all over the world. Largest online conference, over 1,100 participants. Grassroots engagement with Transition US was increasing. Funding was at an all-time high, and new initiatives were starting to form again. And it really felt like we were moving from this vicious cycle on the left of limited support, limited resources, limited capacity, limited impact, to this virtuous cycle on the right of greater support, greater resources, greater capacity, and greater impact. And I think in part, what helped us to move from kind of one phase to the next was, having a common analysis of where we were at as a movement, what needed to be done, a shared theory of change about how we can actually get there, and a coherent rather than a piecemeal strategy that was pulling us in a lot of different directions. And I also think it was important that we were paying attention to some emerging themes in the movement that I think go beyond just the US to the rest of the world. And I think one is really focusing in on supporting local initiatives as our North Star, because that's where the change really happens. And without strong local initiatives, all we've got is just a bunch of really great ideas that we haven't proven yet. So really focusing in on supporting those local initiatives. Also promoting a shift in our movement culture. I think that, for understandable reasons, a lot of transitioners have an aversion to scaling up, to dealing with issues of money and power. But I think we have to grapple with those things, and we can apply our values to how we engage them. Also prioritizing justice. I think, it's very important to do diversity, equity, and inclusion work, but it's also not enough. We really need to integrate justice into everything that we do, into all the projects that we undertake, and make sure that they're not just kind of abstract, trying to build resilience and regeneration for the future, but also helping the people who are most in need right now. And softening boundaries, not eliminating them. I think it's important that we have a banner that we can gather under of the transition movement. But I think often in the past, transition has kind of seemed like a bit of an exclusive club to people with maybe a secret handshake and a password, great unleashing, something. So just softening those boundaries a bit to say, we are really all in this together. We're all moving in the same direction, and that you don't have to call yourself transition wherever or think of yourself as a transitioner to take advantage of all that this movement has to offer. And finally, just dreaming bigger, not taking, wild, irresponsible risks, but taking calculated risks and kind of stepping things up year by year. How can we continue to build momentum? So I've talked a lot about the transition movement. Of course, we are only a small part of this much larger movement of movements. In his 2007 book, Blessed Unrest, Paul Hawken estimates there's 130,000 different groups around the world working for social and environmental justice. And I think we need a great diversity of different kinds of approaches. But I also think that transition offers something fairly unique, and that if it went away, we would need to reinvent it. And I think this movement of movements wants transition to be the best transition it can be, just as we want other movements to be the best that they can be and to work together. And finally, yeah, I believe that if we can do all these things, transition has an important role to play in helping to win the future for sustainability, justice, and regeneration. And I think we shouldn't limit our ideas of what is possible by what we've experienced in the past. There are millions of people around the world right now that are just starting to wake up to the fact that the status quo is fundamentally unsustainable, that it can't continue, and that it's really starting to break down at ever increasing rates. And I think, without seeing a real credible alternative, a lot of the people could fall into despair and apathy and disengagement. And I think that's happening. But I think we have the possibility, if we can pair ourselves, if we can spread this transition vision, if we can create more living examples of the future that we want all over the world, to harness that energy, to ride that wave that may be many times bigger than what we've previously experienced. So that's all I have for now. And I'm really looking forward to hearing your questions, your comments, your thoughts and ideas. And thank you very much for listening.
Thanks so much, Don. Do you want to stop? Yes, exactly. Screen sharing so we can see everyone again. Lovely. So thank you so much for that fantastic presentation, Don. And thanks so much for all your attention, everyone that's here. Please do go ahead and write questions in the chat or raise your hand if you have a question. However, to get us started, we've got a few questions that came in during the webinar, Don. So let's get cracking with those. So the first one was, I think it was from Doreen. Are you finding that success of transition groups still depends on the energy of a small number of individuals, as this seems to be the case in many efforts that they've been involved with? And how do we connect or guide people, active participants in local change efforts? Do you have any experience of this?
Yeah. I think that, it makes sense in a lot of cases for transition to start off as an all volunteer initiative, that there's something beautiful about that. And yeah, that kind of community togetherness. But I do think that, eventually, if we want to scale up to doing these kind of larger projects, that it's very difficult to do that and maintain unless we can have some sort of paid staff for these organizations. I think we kind of hit a ceiling of what we can do, and people start to burn out over time. There's a lot of people that can't volunteer. That in a lot of places is a privileged position to be able to volunteer large amounts of time. And so as a result, something I've seen here in the US is it often is a lot of retirees that are kind of holding these groups together, and they've done so for a number of years. And I think bringing in some resources to support people doing this work on a part-time or full-time basis can start to bring in more younger leadership and bring in new generations of leadership and keep this going and expanding. So yeah, I think that's a really important point, and it was something we didn't talk much about in the early days of transition. But I think, you know, after doing this for 10, 15 years, a lot of us are starting to see the necessity of it. That, yeah, let's bring in some resources to support that. There's nothing wrong with that.
Thanks,
And
Don.
yeah.
Doreen has their hand raised, so I'll go to them in a moment. And I also just wanted to say that something that we've seen in other groups, success at creating succession and engaging more people, and also doing that connecting and bridging work, is going to where people are already gathering around other issues that are relevant to them. So if you're wanting to diversify the people that are coming to transition things, go and find out what groups they're already in as well around local issues that they're interested in, and form partnerships. If you want to work with young people, where are the young people and what are they doing and what do they care about locally? What are the issues they're concerned? So that's one of the strategies that we've seen to be most successful, is don't necessarily expect people to come and join transition. Go and find the people in terms of what they're already interested in, and then look for the synergies and the alignment in terms of, oh, you're looking at this issue about housing, or you're looking at this issue about cost of living. That's relevant to transition too. Let's partner on something. So I think that's one of the feedback we've had from youth groups, or people of colour, or other kinds of groups. We have our own things we're working on, so partner with us on those. And then, yeah, maybe we'll be interested in what you're doing too, and we can see where it's all kind of aligned. Anyway, Doreen, over to you.
Sorry, yeah, thanks. Hi, everybody. Dawn, for me, the question was also going beyond the idea of having paid versus volunteer staff. And actually, it was about, how do you scale up the understanding of people through engagements in citizen-based activities to become more active citizens who feel like they are empowered to affect change at the local or regional level. That's the point for me. Although I'm not involved in the transition movement, I have been following it since its inception, because I think it's a fantastic social innovation example. What I found interesting from something that I read years ago in one of the network articles was that the social movement side of things was becoming much more important, or was recognized as being much more important than actually the environmental movement side of things. So people felt like they could actually affect change in their local communities. And that to me is what's really important. Yeah. It's that participative democracy kind of thing. So that was what I was really questioning, was how can movements in general develop those kinds of approaches and understandings to try to get that change across a larger percentage of society. That was it. Thanks.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think one of the main ways that transition initiatives have done that is by inviting people to form working groups on topics of common interest, sometimes using open space technology to help facilitate that process. But yeah, people gathering together around food and economy and energy, transportation, the arts, healthcare, whatever you can think of, and to bring their own creativity to the table, to, organize their own events, and to, start their own projects. And I think that's a great way to get more and more people involved. I think it is important for the initiative as a whole to support and help to coordinate those working groups. So they're not working at cross purposes, and they have the tools that they need to succeed. And then I think also just, by doing these kind of things and making a real difference in their local communities, they give people back a sense of hope that change is actually really possible, which I think a lot of people have lost. Everything seems so big and so complex and so kind of unmanageable that they inspire people, and then people just go off and do stuff. Maybe they take some tools from transition and many other places, and they start their own, social enterprise or their own nonprofit project. And I think that's the only way that this happens. I mean, the change is much too big for any one organization to coordinate. Really, the best we can be is a catalyst for that transformation.
Don, maybe I can add an example that really inspired me a couple of years ago, which is the city of Bonn in Germany. Some of you might be aware of what's been happening with the transition group there. They, I think, started like many transition groups do, and did several smaller scale projects that were, less, not particularly high risk or controversial. So gardens, and they partnered with the local council to, I think it was, sort of working on creating pollinator areas on council land, and that built trust with the local council. So then when the local council declared a climate emergency, there was already a relationship between the kind of municipality and the transition group. And the transition group were able to say to the city of Bonn, council staff, do you know about your climate emergency? Have you got a plan? And the municipality kind of said, well, not really yet, and how about you help us with that? And that led to a 3-year process that's just finished, where Transition Bonn were given substantial funding by the local council to employ 12 staff with paid roles to carry out a massive citywide consultation that involved recruiting 300 randomly selected citizens across, and over 80 local groups were involved in creating a climate action plan. And one of the ways that they involved local citizens who were not necessarily social or environmental activists before that was to organize walks around the city to talk about how will climate change affect this city, your home, your school, where you walk your dog, where you like to shop. And so this was bringing it right home, of like, and how could it be create a preferred future, a safe future for our city? And that was a way to engage just normal everyday people that maybe hadn't thought about those things. But it helped that it had those, transition, the transition group was resourced, the council was supportive, and then they were able to approach all these different groups and citizens and have a real process with them, which I think is a really fantastic and exciting example. So that was something that stuck in my mind about how to engage people in green. And then also, what groups have said to us about come to our groups and see what we're doing already, and then see how we can create a network around that. And then I think that increases that idea of an ecosystem of change makers. How can each of us organize around our interests, but then uplift and support each other as well? And a few folks are having to leave, which it's been great to have you with us. Thank you very much. And we have still got time for some more questions as well, though. So I will go and have a look at what else we've got. So Don, okay, there was a request for a link to the Sarasota local food directory. I think I found it and put it in the chat, but maybe you can check a bit later, Don, and see if it was the right one. Someone also asked if anyone in Southern Florida was working with the local tribe to restore indigenous local food, or if you knew of anything similar to that.
I don't really know too much about. I have a friend who's a forager, wildcrafter, who does work a lot with the Miccosukee and Seminole, and I think they've been winning a lot of important legal protections over the past decade or two, because they're right at kind of the northern edge of the Everglades and south of Lake Okeechobee, a lot of sugarcane farming and pollution from that there. And they've been winning lawsuits to kind of clean up that agricultural area. But I don't have a whole lot of experience or specific knowledge about that.
Thanks, John. There's also groups in California, like Cooperation Humboldt, that have been working with the Wiyot tribe there and have brought in a what do they call it? The Wiyot tax, which is a way to contribute to reparation. And they've also been involved in land back projects there. Anaí, I don't know whether you want to say anything about what's happening in Latin America with some of the transition groups supporting Indigenous projects and activities there. Is that something you might want to speak to?
Yeah, I can share that in Colombia, a lot is active there in terms of connection with the indigenous cultures, and Aviala group is willing to bring more of that from Mexico, Colombia, Brazil, and also from here, from Mapuche land. So yeah, hope this can continue thriving together in the next months.
Thanks,
And to
Anaí.
bring it together with the North. One of the things that has been very much present in the Aviala is to connect the North with the South in terms of webbing together and
Maybe
not
you
do
can just
this
say
separation. Mhm.
what Abiyala is for those people who don't know what the term is, and also what we mean in Transition Network when we say Abiyala as well.
Yeah, Aviala is a concept that has been used before the colonization to name the whole land between Patagonia to Alaska. And is the name that resonates with a lot of the indigenous people. So now that we are weaving again these cultures, we're recovering these tongues. And since 3 years, the different hubs of Latin America mainly has gathered to create a more territorial action. First in the Spanish speaking and Portuguese speaking, but we have some friends from Brazilian hubs here also. And the idea has been for years to bring together North America. There are old prophecies of the condor and the eagle coming together, and the local groups are very much connected with all these like narratives. So I think it's beautiful, and in the next months probably a new weaving of the like territorial area is going to be reactivated. So we'll let you know.
Thanks so much, Anaí. Has her hand up. Would you like to go next, Dennis?
Sure. So I am taking a new angle, my own angle, for transition. After like 11 years of doing a group here in Fort Collins, and I am wondering what it would look like, or how, Dawn, do you imagine that people could collaborate ongoingly if like you've opened the door to like people doing social businesses or social enterprise business and that kind of thing. But I'm not clear about what that collaboration could look like. I have a new, I came to a place of burnout. It became very obvious from a series of dreams that I had and that I needed to turn away. But I'm moving that dream theme forward into collective dreaming, where people actually create a vision of what to do together in small groups, very small groups, because it's an intimate topic, and then take action on that. And I don't know how to play with you.
Yeah, well, I think, this goes back to what I said at the beginning of the presentation, is that we've always said there's no one right way to do transition. And
Right.
that Yeah, I mean, I think something like that, if you found it useful to, be part of the network and put yourself on the map and take advantage of some of the resources that transition has to offer, it doesn't have to exactly look like, even what I was describing with the 5 stages. I think for me, the core of, what makes something transition, what not, is the transition principles. And now we also have the characteristics. And, looking at, we build resilience and respect resource limits. We collaborate and look for synergies. We um, practice social justice and inclusion. And if you agree with those kind of things, I think to me, that's like the bar for being part of this movement, is like, are we aligned in terms of what our vision and our values are? And if we aren't, let's work if we are, well, let's work together. Yeah, it doesn't have to specifically look like this or that.
Well, there's something in the UK called social dreaming that people do, where especially in HR situations where they can bring together their dreams and then they create actions out of social collective dreaming. And there's my understanding from doing years of dream work is that there are collective dreams and you're tapping into deeper wisdom than your ego has, for instance. So I can imagine how you could make an offering, but I just and that the principles would not be necessarily a problem. It would just be a completely different angle than what most people are used to.
One thing I might suggest, Janice, is that sounds like a really interesting practice. And we do have this practicing transition camp. You can come and share a practice that you think is useful for transition groups or has been used by transition groups or aligned groups, and run a short webinar and Q&A about it and teach other people how to do it. So if that's of interest, you can reach out to Anaï or the practicing transition team, and there'll be an opportunity to share more about that practice with other transitioners if you'd like to. I'm aware of time and that we wanted to get to breakout rooms, and also that her hand up. Would it be okay if we just moved on to Gwen quickly now, Janice, and got her question, and then we'll be going into breakout rooms? Or was there anything final you wanted to say? Nope, you've muted yourself. Okay. So I'll go to Gwen now.
Hi, Dawn and everyone.
Everyone.
I've been, it seems like there are, a lot of areas, towns where, and I'm speaking for myself, Carbondale, Colorado, where there's been a lot of groundwork done, and it feels like it's time to formalize a mechanism for driving all of the adaptive transition type activities. Do you have examples of any of those formal mechanisms, like nonprofits that have been formed in towns to take over this area of climate action?
Yeah, I think they do exist in quite a few places, whether they're, a climate justice coalition or a local food shed alliance or something like that. I think transition, because it touches on all of these different topics, has a great aptitude to be able to bring together all the great things that are happening in a place. All the different groups that, maybe somebody's working on school gardens over here, and some other groups working on improving the public transportation system. And yeah, just kind of helping to weave all of those together. And I think, whether it's transition or not, that is an important thing for every community to have. Some structure, some place, some organization that helps to kind of bring all these together and show that they're all connected, that this is a bigger movement. It's not just a bunch of kind of isolated initiatives. But I don't know if that was answering your question exactly.
Yeah, I guess it's more so that because I see time and time again that funding is an issue. So we need to find a way to like fund these more inclusive kind of organizations that can drive this part. Because I see like there are actually 2 organizations in our area, in our watershed, that work on climate action, but only decarbonization. There's no major organization that's working on the adaptive piece of climate action.
Mm-hmm.
And it feels like that's something that, I mean, I do see local food organizations in different places around the country, but I wonder if there are examples of organizations that are working specifically on, you know, the breadth of adaptive transition kind of strategies.
Yeah, I think there are. I mean, many transition initiatives, but also lots of other kinds of groups. Yeah, maybe need to start a new organization there in Carbondale.
Yeah, I mean, I know we're at that point where it's really needed, and I'd love to know of other examples. So if anybody knows of any climate action groups that have been have gotten the blessing of, you know, municipalities or counties that are actually doing this part of climate action, not just the decarbonization piece, I'd love to know about them.
It might be
I'm sure
worth
in this
us.
group.
Sorry, Don.
Go ahead, Deb.
I was going to say it might be worth us connecting Gwen with the municipal project. So that's a project that was birthed from Transition Network and has become its own project, which is specifically working with local councils. And they've created a toolkit and a process for working with local councils to look at resilience and regeneration for the whole area. So I will find you the link and pop that in the chat.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
And just one other thing I wanted to say about this real quick is that I do think it's important to be very sensitive and approach that kind of role gently, because you know, we don't want to go in there saying, oh, we've got the answers, we're going to be the big umbrella for all of you. I think more it's, you know, really getting to understand the kind of ecology of groups in that community and taking a posture of servant leadership, of saying like, you know, we would like to help to support you. How can we be of help to you? And coming at it from that perspective.
I'm remembering that the Municipalities and Transition group, when they became their own entity, changed their name to Kuhn Lab. So I'm just putting the Kuhn Lab link here, and that will tell you all about the Municipalities and Transition project. And you can probably find out more information there as well.
Thank you so much.
Okay. All right. So we're going to shift into breakout rooms. And we are a little bit over time, so we'll maybe just have 15 minutes or so in the breakout rooms. And I've posted the questions in the chat, which I might repost again, actually, so that they're right at the bottom. So our 3 questions are, what do you think about the 5 stages of transition that Don's gone through and that are in the book and in the transition? Do they resonate with your experience of doing transition? And if not, how or why not? So that's one question that you could explore. Another is, what do you see as some of the most important emerging themes in the transition movement or the wider kind of regenerative community-led movement or movement of movements?
We kind of just went on our own path, but that's good. And we're talking about how, you know, you sort of feel like you're constantly stuck at the starting out stage of transition. And I'm in a group as well. And yeah, it is like really hard to go from the small, simple things into the bigger projects, and when you find out about Liège and Angersheim in France, you're taken aback. But yeah, maybe that's all right. And Alistair's from a rural community, and one thing I really resonated with was his community's 500 people, and I think that's a great scale for the transition group. You know, you don't want to feel like you're trying to tackle the world, I suppose.
I mean, I think we have the advantage of scale, actually, because, you know, 5 years ago, we had a community action plan. We've just renewed it with what we call our local place plan now. But in the sense of, you know, we're all volunteers, but we can take local initiatives. You know, we can get the cooperation where we can from the bigger governmental local authority bodies, but most of it we have to get on with ourselves. And we're lucky that we do get some income from a local hydro scheme that we're partners in, so that helps. But I get the impression from those of you in kind of urban settings that it's almost like too big. You need to break it down into manageable neighborhoods where there is some shared sense of identity.
That's a great tip, Alistair. Thank you. Nenad, you were in that group too. Did you want to add anything else from that group, or have... No? Okay, wonderful. Janice, were you waving to have a go as well? I wasn't sure if you were just moving your hand. Yes, good. Okay.
I love what Tom has done in his community in the UK, where the elders hold the space for young parents and children. I think that's just brilliant, actually. Thank you, Tom, for that idea.
Very cool. Thank you. It's good to hear about that. Tom, did you want to share anything more about what you talked about in your group?
I guess it was Parents for the Future are a national organization, and a few parents came to us to say they wanted to form one. And so we thought, well, we'll book the rooms, we'll reach out and get people to come and talk with you. We'll do the leaflets, and then you can come along with your children and just be there. And we haven't started yet. We're having our first meeting on November the 16th, and we're going to have a bug hunt around a local school. I fear the elders are going to get in the way of the children, but no, it's just going to be great, I think. And I think as an elder, I feel very responsible for the state that we've left the planet in, and to help the parents be involved without them having to do all the boring stuff, I think is the way to go forward.
That's a great example. Thanks, Tom. It also reminds me of something else that came from the transition group in Tooting, where they came alongside a group that it was a Muslim-led care facility for elders in the being threatened with closure, and they, I think, had been involved in a project with some of the people from that group previously, and they used some of their resources as the transition group to create a space for people to come together to talk about that and to kind of advocate for that facility not being shut down. So it was another example of a transition group allying with and advocating for another community group that was struggling, and kind of using some of their members or position or privilege or resource to do that active allyship. And I think that can be a really wonderful way to build those bridges and to diversify the connections and the groups. So yeah, thank you for reminding me of that story. Would anyone else like to share something from their group? Or Don, did you want to say something? I saw you were unmuted.
Oh, I was just on that point. I was wondering if Shari would talk a little bit about a partnership with the Chester citizens nearby Transition Town Media.
Yeah, I actually was just about to raise my hand. So we're a small town in Media, Pennsylvania. It's actually a county seat of Delaware County, and part of Delaware County is a a city named Chester that is, maybe 85% Black, and it's on the Delaware River. It used to be a very thriving industrial center. And then all the industry left, and just left the people who didn't have the resources to move away themselves. So there's a lot of need in that town, and we've been trying to do a lot of partnering with them. There's a number of issues, of course. As most Black communities, there's a lot of pollution creating industry there, an incinerator and fossil fuel refineries and so on and so forth, that we're partnering with them to diminish. And also we have a local economy initiative. It's called the Circle of Aunts and Uncles, where we have donor-funded pool of money that we can loan out to businesses in Chester. Well, in any town, but at the moment we actually have 3 businesses in Chester that we're supporting through this loan fund. It's a low interest fund, and specifically meant to help the local business either start up or grow itself in whatever way they need, whether it's a restaurant needing more equipment, bigger freezer, whatever they need to purchase and pay back over time. So it's really been an exciting collaboration with Chester that we've been privileged to be a part of.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Sorry. Okay, is there any short final contribution that someone wants to make, or shall we start wrapping the bundle here and moving towards a close? Is anyone bursting to share one final thing? And if not, we'll move along to closing.
I just want to thank Don for all of his efforts. I've known Don for years and seen how hard he works and how broad his knowledge is. And yeah. Woo!
Thanks,
Thank you.
John. Yeah.
I find it to be a great privilege to be able to do such meaningful work and work with such great people.
So I would like to thank Don as well for being such an integral part of our movement here and of the Transition Network International team now as well, and for writing this fantastic book that we can all be inspired by and use for very practical efforts as well. And to all of you for coming along, and for everyone that was here for the earlier part as well, or might be watching later. It's been a really, really vibrant, kind of juicy, full webinar today with lots of fantastic shared. And I think it's really interesting how one of the themes that's emerged today is how do we do this connecting and bridging phase? And there's been some lovely examples of how people have worked in allyship with other groups in their local areas, whether that's the council or whether that's groups that are struggling with other issues locally that we might not initially think of as being transition issues, but when we look at the system holistically, we realize that all of these things are interconnected. To other groups, we can start to diversify our community action and build stronger connections. So that's something I'm taking away with me. John, did you want to add
I'd like to remind everybody that there are lots of links in the chat, and you can save the chat by going up to the top with the 3 dots and just save the chat. That probably won't be shared with the video, although maybe it will. I don't know.
That's a fantastic reminder. Thank you. And Anaí, you had some.
Yeah, I can share also that the Aviala friends are coming for the next practice of transition. They're going to share some elders' knowledge on how to speak in circle. It's going to be in Spanish with English interpretation in the Zoom channel. And you're super welcome to connect with the Aviala community coming to the next webinar that is on the 5th of November. And on the 14th of November, we have a full moon celebration with the Cultural Transformation Circle. And the idea is to connect as community. Transitioners just come together, celebrate that we're together existing and share experience and build bonds, relationships, and kind of rest and build resilience together. So you're super welcome to come. You have all the information in the chat. You will receive a follow-up email with the recording of today and also what we share on the chat. And at the end of that post, you can also find at the end web post with very interesting information of the whole transformation of the core system in the international scale. And we're inviting you to 2 webinars with Deborah and me to share and ask any questions about this like systemic transformation that we're really happy that is bringing a lot of efficiency to the system and distribution. So you're welcome to join us, and happy to see friends from Australia. I know that it's late there. We all are doing efforts to be in this global space. So thank you very much, and thank you, Dawn. Thank you, Debs, for all this space. And I don't know if Dawn or Debs want to say something more.
Thank you for highlighting those 2 websites, the Practicing Transition website and the Cultural Transformation website. The Transition Network website is going under review, and it's not the most vibrant website in our system at the moment. So do go and have a look at Practicing Transition, which has so many fantastic webinars on it from this year of people from all over the movement sharing their effective, inspiring practices with us that we can try in our own areas. And the Cultural Transformation, which will website, has also wonderful gatherings that you can join with other activists and transitioners from around the world to support you in your work and to help us shift global consciousness towards a regenerative biocentric worldview. And Transition Network International has gone under a big restructure recently, and I'm very happy to report that we are working much more effectively. Our team feels fantastic at the moment. We've got more funders becoming interested in us, and very soon we'll see how these things take hope that we can start to offer seed grants and development grants directly to hubs and local groups again. That's one of our absolute key aims, is to try and get more resources towards transition and put it out to the grassroots. So we're working hard on that for you. And please come along to those Ask Us Anything sessions, and so we can hear from you what else we can do to support you. And that is everything from me. And I will just thank Dawn again and say, Dawn, did you have any final words you want to say?
Yeah, just a lot of gratitude. Thank you to you all for all the great work that you do. And I think, whatever we're doing, we should appreciate that. I think, I think these times are calling us to dig in and scale up and be bold, but it's not on any one of us or any one group to do it all. So let's keep doing it.